culture hero, coming to save us all. You never judged us, taught us to stand up tall. Pop culture hero, taught us to be as one. After the prequels, the healing has begun. Walking the thin line between heaven, earth, and hell. Pop culture hero, saving us from ourselves. So what happened?
Well, it's one hell of a story, actually. It all started with the darkness goes back. It all started with the darkness, basically. Now, the origins of the darkness are only vaguely described. It started mostly with the Native Americans and everything else, and that was really its first major inclination towards it. We honestly don't know how far back this darkness goes or what its major origins are. Only that it's primal and it likely came from the Native Americans, and they were at least the first to touch it. It was but for all we know, it was always kind of inhabiting the lake. It always really inhabited the lake. Now that's important because from what we know about the lake is certainly sitting on a volcanic plain.
Back home, okay?
Okay, we can talk about this later.
Bad man here on KBFF.
I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to bury my head in sand.
Here's another one of my favorites to go with it.
Once upon a time, I was a successful writer, but that was a long time ago. I hadn't been able to write a word in 2 years, not since my last book.
And now the weather. It's gonna be a clear night, so you folks in the big city might want to look up every once in a while, see those stars winking down at you. It gets pretty dark out here, but they'll light your way.
Which is true for a lot of very high mountains. High mountain ranges, there usually is volcanic activity in them, and in a lot of cases, an earthquake or something like that, volcanic activity can cause the topography to change. The lake can drain, islands inside can be brought in. So there definitely was some science behind it. So flash forward to about probably around, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, when it really, really started going to shit. Now, there was this man named...
By Thomas Zane.
And his girlfriend was Barbara Jagger, and they had another friend named Cynthia Weaver. Thomas was a poet and a writer. And he was suffering from writer's block. He lived in the lake in the cabin, and he liked to dive off of it. That's why they called it Diver's Isle. He loved doing deep-sea diving there. And, well, what happened was, unfortunately, at one point, Barbara drowned in the lake. And, well, you can't really see her come back from that. But along the while, Tom had kind of discovered that there was some power behind the lake, that there was something magical that could be brought to life through... it needed something. It needed some mysticism. It needed a writer. It needed somebody to create. But if it could create something, if somebody was strong enough to create something, then it could actually produce what had happened. His good friend was named Emil Hartman, and we know who Emil Hartman is, or if not, I'm going to tell you who Emil Hartman was.
I'm Dr. Emil Hartman. I'd like to invite you to stay at Cauldron Lake Lodge.
Did you talk to my wife?
I had the pleasure of discussing your situation with her on several occasions.
Did you set something up with her?
I invited her here. My clinic is a place where...
Oh, hey, oh my, take it easy.
His good friend was Emil Hartman, and he encouraged him. He was there the whole time. He knew what Thomas was trying to do, but, you know, it's crazy talk. Tom's intention was to use the power of the lake that he had discovered to bring Barbara back from the dead. But Tom didn't know what was really going on, what the full extent of what he was going to have to do was, or what the lake was going to do, or what the darkness was going to do once its full power had been unleashed, once it had unleashed its full power. He, through his writing, was able to bring Barbara back. The problem was that it wasn't what had come out, and he didn't realize until later on. Cynthia was the first to really discover what was going on. that was not in fact Barbara. What had been produced wasn't in fact Barbara. Something had happened to Barbara because Tom had not completed the story. As a writer, I know this. Stories have to make a logical sense. Each individual thing has to add up. Like, everything has to add up. That's why a lot of stories that fail critically are because the writer cut corners or the writer changed something, and the rest of the story just didn't follow that changing. Like, all of a sudden, like, you're building up to one ending, and the ending is just different from what you expect. But if you actually think deeply upon it, this ending, if you watch the whole movie in this context of that ending, it doesn't work. Like, how could it possibly have been that way up until that point if this is what the character wanted to do the whole time? It just doesn't make sense. That's why a lot of comic books have gotten bad reviews. That's why a lot of people thought 52 Countdown was pretty bad. And the comic series Countdown to Final Crisis. But however, there were some stories where if you look back, like with The Usual Suspects, for example, it does actually make sense. That twist, even though it wasn't what you were expecting, it does make sense because it fits within the story, and that's just, a testament to Bryan Singer, of course, that he was able to make the twist ending work. Here, Thomas had done something wrong. He had changed this. He had made this. The story didn't make logical sense, so the darkness twisted it for its own purpose and adopted a persona. It used Barbara Jagger's body or skin or whatever to have a persona of itself. And Tom too late realized this. And what he finally realized was, and it's hinted upon at the very end of the regular version of the game, not including the DLC, but you can hear the audio of what had actually happened. When Tom realized what had happened, he tied Barbara down, or what I should say, the darkness imbued Barbara, and killed her by cutting her heart out. Which is why Barbara Jagger, as we see the darkness, has a hole in her chest. Cynthia Weaver knew everything. Cynthia Weaver knew everything. Emil Hartman knew everything. And Tom, to fix everything that he realized that he had unleashed, rewrote the story and wrote himself out of existence. And he had to. Thomas had been a very accomplished poet. People had known him for many years. But he wrote himself, in trying to undo the damage that he had done by bringing Barbara Jagger back, which had woken up the darkness which had been slumbering, he wrote himself out of existence. But, knowing that, and quite possibly the darkness could return, he wrote himself a loophole into the story. Well, what happened to the story? What happened after that? He wrote himself a loophole in case anybody else could do it, and he entrusted it to Cynthia Weaver to protect and keep in light at all times. Weaver, over the years, became mad, pretty much obsessed with just complete fear of darkness. Wrote herself rules under which no circumstances to ever step near shadows of darkness. Make sure that everybody's light bulbs were always changed in the daytime. Never going out at dark. Never leaving her home at dark. Always keeping her lights on. Her lights on. She bought out the old abandoned power plant in exchange for that. Emil Hartman, knowing this, realized the power of the lake for creativity in writers, but having no personal creativity of his own, he decided that his best option was to be more of a producer or an agent, or if you will, and opened the cabin on the lake. Opened the cabin lodge on Cauldron Lake, the Cauldron Lake Lodge, and invited over writers because he realized that what it was able to do was it was able to, just as it had for Thomas Zane, it was able to bring creativity to writers and artists that did not, were having, blocks and stuff like that, were having problems with it. So that was what Hartman was doing. So the darkness was slowly slumbering, waiting for another major artist. Meanwhile, Weaver went, pretty much lost, kind of was starting to lose it. Hartman was making a lucrative money, telling success stories and writing books. And then the old gods of Asgard showed up. The musicians kind of started doing something. The old gods of Asgard were two people who had a successful band up in the 70s, so they came later. And what had happened was that these people grew up from farmers. You know, their family were farmers. Their parents were farmers. And like with any farmers, you know, there was moonshining and stuff like that. Well, these two brothers started making moonshine, you know, which was an acceptable thing to do. But the problem was that they were making the moonshine out of the unfiltered water from the lake. And it was giving them visions. It was giving them knowledge of the future. It was giving them all kinds of stuff because the lake was cursed. There was some volcanic activity, that things were going on still. After Tom had written himself out of existence, the island on the lake disappeared. It had woken up a volcano or something like that, which destroyed the island and sunk it into the lake. A lot of mine workers died that were in the area. They flooded but it was considered to be volcanic seismic activity. Something had happened that the artists, even though the old gods of Asgard were not evil by any means, and they didn't know but they were meddling with powers they had no idea about. And what they were doing it was causing, because they were moonshining, it caused them to get inspiration for writing music. They'd write all this beautiful music and all this wonderful music that was extremely popular and extremely well received, but it had woken up the darkness again. Years later, they were too far gone to realize what they had done, but they wrote down, somehow they had a vision or something that somebody would be coming around. They assumed it probably would have been through the visions Thomas Zane himself.
We wrote it all down lest we'd forget. A crash course. All you need to know to get your head right. You need to find the message.
Here, Sonny, here's something for you. Gave me a rash, but I kept it safe from these bastards.
Would return and possibly try to undo all this. And they would need to help him if that had happened. It's written. That's why it was written into the music themselves. They didn't know what they were writing. They were high off their kites. You know, they didn't. They didn't know what they were writing. They just knew it was important. They knew something was going on, but they didn't know what it meant. The only thing that was making them famous and making them completely high as a kite. But when they drank that stuff, they were on cloud nine. They thought that they could do nothing. One of them actually cut their own eye out because they thought it would come back. That's why one of them has an eye patch. The writings took the journal entries of the manuscript pages actually specifically started writing about that. The townspeople knew something, particularly the people particularly the older generation of the townspeople. The doc knew something was going on, knew that darkness was knew something was going on because of course they had experienced it before when Thomas Zane was around. When you know, they thought they had sealed it all away. They thought it was maybe, you know, it's like with anything, it's like, okay, some weirdness happens, but it's over, and then, you know, it's not unlikely they're coming back, right? It's human nature to assume that when something is gone, it's going to be gone forever. And then Alan showed up with his wife, and the darkness knew that this was something big, that that it could use Alan, and it knew this because Hardman was trying his best to get Alan there. So there was some cognitive nature to it. It was getting smarter. The darkness was getting smarter. Originally it was just primal, but as things were waking it up, it had taken a persona of Barbara Jagger, you know, and stuff like that. But Barbara Jagger was aging, was still aging, and it needed somebody new. It needed some new persona, and I think it wanted Alice.
I am much older than you. Older than your first work of art. I will find a new face to wear. Someone else to dream me free.
And it wanted to use Alice as a way to get Alan to write, just like it had with Thomas Zane and Barbara Jagger. And that's pretty much what happens at the very. That's all the backstory of what happened up until the point of what the game started. That's pretty much. Everything I told you up to that point is literally all backstory up until second one where Alan is having nightmares. And because while Zane had written himself out of existence, Zane still had figured out a way to survive, had survived being trapped in the darkness through using the light, using his diver suit. He had survived somehow. he was still trapped. He couldn't find a way out. Now, when the game starts, Alice gets taken by Barbara Jagger.
Alice? 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 Oh no!
Trapped in the cabin. Jagger uses Alan to... but the Darkness uses Barbara Jagger's influence on him to get Alan to write.
Yes. I'll write. I'll fix it. I'll bring her back.
But Alan was finding Thomas Zane's books. Alan was using them as inspiration. He was using his own story. He was realizing that as he was writing the story, and as he was writing the story while trying to bring Alice back, because he had assumed that she had drowned, he realized that the story needed to have logic. It needed to work. But he realized that even if he had stopped writing, the story would continue on to a logical conclusion. Just like with nature, it's like you're building up to a story. Even if the story stops, the world will continue to turn, and the story will lead up to its conclusion. And what he realized was that Alice was going to die at the end of every logical conclusion he could think of. Alice was going to die at the very end of the story. So Alan decided he had to take a risk. He wrote himself into the story, and he knew that he was going to have to be bound by the rules of the story that he was writing. Whatever he was writing was going to happen, and he was going to have to be bound by it. But he had to figure out a way to get himself out. So he wrote that Thomas Zane was able to free him and keep him safe. That he had given Thomas Zane the power of the light to free himself from the darkness. But it had weakened Thomas Zane.
It isn't here now. I'm here because it was written. I brought the light to set you free. You must hurry. It will know I'm here. It will be back soon. It stole the skin of my Barbara a long time ago. She looks so old.
For a week, Alan had been trapped in the cabin trying to write this story to get Alice out after Alice had been trapped in the lake. After Alan was freed, he lost all of his memories of the week. The whole week that he had spent. But Zane, on the other hand, knew what was going on and realized that the best action was to give Alan the manuscript pages in a sequence that could help Alan to remember what was going on. And that's pretty much what happened.
Excuse me. I need to take this. Hello?
Alan, please help me.
Alice?
Stop talking to the law. You'll do exactly what I say if you ever want to see your wife again.
Now, there was some talk about what was going on with the story about Mott Hartman and the kidnapping of Alan's wife. Originally, Alan believed that his wife was kidnapped. It turned out to be, the kidnapper turned out to be a guy named Mott, who later turned out to be working for Dr. Hartman. Mott later explained, before he was killed by the darkness, that no, he never actually did have Alan's wife. But that begs the question, Mott did in fact have Alice's driver's license, which was something that was impressive. The only way I can figure out to explain how it was he got her driver's license is either he pickpocketed it from her while they were on the ferry, because Mott was on that ferry when they got into town, or he might have pickpocketed it from her while she was going to buy flashlights and get maps and stuff like that when Alan was in the diner. Those are the only two conclusions under which I can figure out that he got her driver's license. So he must have pickpocketed it before they got to the cabin, sometime between the ferry and them getting there. So what happened was that Mott never had it. They were just using it as leverage. Mott was working basically completely as a tool of Hartman. Hartman wanted to get Alan working. He wanted to use Alan to write a story to basically, mold the darkness into doing whatever it was that Hartman wanted. And he wanted to use the threat of Alan's wife and her death as an excuse to get him to write, and to get him to write what they want, and to get it to come true. I don't know exactly what total nefarious purpose was Hartman wanted. He definitely didn't seem like the Snidely Whiplash, I want to take over the world thing. Maybe he wanted fame and fortune for it, I don't know. He did seem to have a pretty good business going on with the lake, and maybe I guess he wanted more. Was the most powerful man in the world he wants half the world, he wants the other half. So maybe it was he wanted to accumulate more power. I don't, he never really makes it clear. All we know is that he wanted to use Alan for the purposes of the story, and to mold the story for his own purposes, because he knew what was going on. And if that meant the threat of, like, we have your wife would do it, then that was what Hartman was going to do. But no, Hartman never had his wife. Mott never had his wife. The whole point was to get is to just do whatever they possibly could to make it look like Alan was in intention of writing, and that this was like a whole illusion or something like that, and that Alan was in fact just running through different stories and stuff like that.
This is Agent Nightingale, FBI! Get him up, Hemingway! You're under arrest! You move a muscle, I'll unload right in your goddamn face! Stay right where you are, Spillane! I'm standing right here, you goddamn maniac!
Now, a lot of people are probably going to be asking questions about what was up with Agent Nightingale. A lot of that wasn't explained in the game. And the truth is, no, it really isn't. What was Agent Nightingale's role in all this? Agent Nightingale was the drunken FBI agent who kept claiming he had authority yet had no superiors to confirm all this. Most of Agent Nightingale's backstory was kind of written, if you have the collector's edition. There is a book included with the collector's edition called The Alan Wake Files, written by Clay Stewart. Clay Stewart is a guy who was in the very beginning of the game. He appeared in one of Alan's dreams. Clay Stewart kind of tells the story that he and Alan had kind of been sharing dreams for a while, that Clay Stewart had appearing. Over no point, actually, had he ever met Alan face to face, but he was still sharing dreams with Alan, and he didn't even realize Alan was the person in his dream was real until he saw Alan on television. The mannerisms, the voice, and the appearance was the same. How could he be having dreams up to this point, on an almost weekly, nightly basis, with a person he had never met before? And he had no explanation for this. As he was starting to find Agent Nightingale's truth, he basically had a pilgrimage to Bright Falls. Clay Stewart had a pilgrimage to Bright Falls, and he found Agent Nightingale's files. And if you play the game, you'll notice that Agent Nightingale did hide his files in the same place that Clay Stewart did find them. He kept them in the vent, basically. And if you play the game, you'll notice that Nightingale hid all of his files in the vent. Stewart does find them in the book, and he does specifically go on about what he had found. And he assumed that pretty much Nightingale was in all likelihood an accomplished FBI person, but had started having the dreams just like he and Alan had, the nightmares that were being brought on by the darkness. And Nightingale had incorrectly assumed that possibly Alan was the cause of these dreams, when in fact he was just a player, just like Nightingale was a puppet. It was why the darkness was affecting Clay Stewart and Agent Nightingale, I have no idea. That's never explained. Maybe there were more people that were being affected from farther away. I don't know. That's really, again, like I said, never explained in any of that. But that's Nightingale. They also written backstory that Nightingale possibly, and originally Nightingale was going to be a playable character in the game. They later changed what was going to be his scenes to just basically stories written in the LCE book. But what had happened was that Nightingale had possibly lost a partner.
Oh no! Stop! No! Damn it, die! No! No! No!
That's pretty much what happened up until, that's like the logic. Obviously, Alan had to figure out a way to finish the story. he had intentionally written that the story was incomplete at the very end, but he was going to need some help. So, and he needed Zane's help. So the story he had written into, knowing what Zane had been done, and knowing that what Zane had written, he knew that he was going to need the help of Cynthia Weaver. He knew that it was somebody. He knew he was going to need the help of the Lady of Light. Now the problem is, what I'm kind of telling you with this story is that even the DLC didn't really super explain, who wrote what. Alan could have, for all we know, Thomas could have written that original page that he finds. When Thomas had written, I know I'm kind of confusing Alan with Tom here, and the truth is that the game was kind of ambiguous about whether or not the original pages that were being kept by Cynthia Weaver that told the story of Alan's life as a young child were actually written by Thomas Zane, or if Alan had written it and made it look like Thomas Zane had written it. Zane had mentioned in one of the DLCs that, no, you were the writer. It's like, but what about that page? Didn't you write that? And Zane says nothing. And honestly, I think that they said that probably because the writers didn't even know. I don't think the game writers even knew that one. But so like obviously there are some kind of story, parts of the story that we don't know if they add up yet. Well, what happens is that using the weapons that he'd written himself to find that were left by Thomas Zane, Alan figures how to destroy Barbara Jagger's persona, finishes the story, which frees Alice. But traps himself in the lake. He's now trapped in the cabin. He's now trapped in the lake.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
The DLC continues that story, that Alan had indeed gone mad while in the lake, while trapped in the cabin, with nothing really with the darkness. And Zane was helping him the best he possibly could to try to get the pieces back together, of his mind back together. At the end of the DLC, Alan, still trapped in the lake, but now sane, now all his mental cognitivity has come back together, decides that the only way to free himself and to free Zane along with it is to write a sequel to Departure. Departure being the very first, the title of the manuscript that he had written for the very first game. Departure's sequel, called Return, would be a sequel. Now, this has teased that if Alan is writing a sequel to Departure, that Alan Wake will return for a sequel, that there will be a sequel for Alan Wake. It's kind of, that's what, and that's why I recommend to anybody, if you haven't played the DLC, definitely play it. Definitely download and play the DLC, especially if you finish the game. Because it actually does kind of come out like, yes, I'm writing a sequel, there's going to be a sequel. Remedy has not at this point confirmed a sequel, but it does seem extremely likely. This does look to be, if what's going on, Alice is free. Will Alan come back? How does Alan and get himself and get Tom out of the darkness that they find themselves trapped in? Hey, I want to play it. Remedy, I'll get on it.
I could think clearly again. But I couldn't survive in this place the way he had, and I might not make it back a second time. Leaving this place would be hard. Maybe impossible. It wouldn't take much for my thoughts to stray again. It was too easy to get lost in the dark place. Before, I was ready to curl up and die. Let myself slip away. But here I was, the yet unwritten future waiting to unfold before me. A sequel to Departure. My name is Alan Wake, and I'm a writer.
That's pretty much the Alan Wake, you know, cover to cover, basically, in one take. That's pretty much like all the explanation of Alan Wake. If anybody has any other questions or anything you think I missed, by all means, post a comment. But there you have it. There's the whole explanation of Alan Wake. Remedy, I want to play a sequel. I want to see where this goes, and I will be more than happy to do a second video on if they do a sequel. I will be more than happy to do a second video on this. So, take care, everybody. Enjoy your Martin Luther King Day. Maniac out.
There's an old town road with mystery of Tom the poet and his muse, and a magic lake which gave a life to the words the poet used. Now the muse she was his happiness, and he rhymed about her grace, and told the stories of treasures deep beneath the blackened waves. Till in the stillness of wonder, and still in its misty crown, the muse she went down to the lake, and in the waves she drowned. And now to see your love set free, you will need the witch's cabin key. Find the lady of the light, gone mad with the night. That's how you reshape destiny. The poet came down to the lake to call out to his dear. When there was no answer, he was overcome